Gre- Greetings, everyone. It's my honor to introduce our guest speaker. Tatsudo Nicole Baden is the abbot of the international nonprofit organization Dharma Sangha and its two Zen practice centers, the Crestone Mountain Zen Center in Colorado, USA, and the Zen Buddhist Center in the Black Forest, Germany. Nicole is a Dharma successor of Zentatsu Baker Roshi in the Soto Zen lineage. She has been practicing Zen since 2001 and received Dharma transmission in 2017. Nicole graduated as a psychologist from the University of Oldenburg in 2008. She also trained at the School for Body Mind Centering for 4 years. She was a member of the Council of the German Buddhist Union from 2013 to 2019 and is currently serving on the Advisory Council of the Mindfulness Oriented MBSR Association. She has been living and practicing either at the Crestone Mountain Center or at the Zen Buddhist Center in Schwarzwald in Germany since 2009. The title of her talk is Zen, a Culture of Meeting and Speaking. Nicole Roshi, we welcome you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, that was quite a wonderful start. Thank you so much. It's great and actually feels like home to see you guys at the Atlanta Zendo. It's interesting how I hope that some of you may feel this way when we start practicing, how Zendos can feel like home, no matter where they are. It's just a kind of home. Yeah, thank you very much also to you, Tai-un Sama, Sensei, Roshi. I never know how to call Buddhist people, so I just cover my bases here. Thank you for inviting me, Atlanta Zen Center. It's wonderful and great that so many people from Europe also joined. It really does feel like a kind of, that's what online can do, a digital way of meeting and speaking. Yeah, we're sitting here, by the way, since everyone announced their location. We're in Colorado. I'm at the Crestone Mountain Zen Center with a really nice, wonderful group of residents, which I don't think you can see though, right? No. And Baker Roshi is here as well. I should say up front, because we have like, I'm gonna need to end at the latest at 10 a.m. our time, because that's when Baker Roshi will begin his talk. So we'll have to, but I think that should work. That gives us plenty of time. Okay, yeah, so I met with Tai-un Sama when was that? Yesterday, a couple days ago. And just to get a feeling for your Sangha at the Atlanta Zen Center. And he said you guys are interested in art. And I can see, it's fascinating to see. It looks like you're sitting on your seats in the Zendo. You're actually looking at art. Is that right? There's art in front? That's amazing. So we share a common interest here. I think our Sangha is also deeply engaged with how, well, I would say maybe just playing with how the world can be seen, which of course, one way to discover that is through arts, how the world can be perceived and seen. Yeah, and Tai-un said to just maybe introduce myself in some way, tell you guys a little bit about my how I came to practice and my path. So I'm happy to do that. You've already mentioned when you went through my bio for me, clearly the core of what I feel I do is just I sit zazen, and I'm immensely interested in how sitting on this 1 square meter, you kind of start, at least that's my experience, I start entering the space of sitting with one kind of here. Oh, this is here now. This is me being here. And then not long into the period, what here is, what here feels like, can profoundly change. I think that's a kind of magic thing, how what here feels like can profoundly change on this just 1 square meter. I told Tova Green from the San Francisco Zen Center just a few days ago, we did an interview, and she asked me the same questions, like kind of way-seeking mind questions. Which I always think is just the most fascinating, how does a seeker or a practitioner, how and why do they practice? And what is it that unfolds along the way? And like Tayun said too, we're each geographically in all these different locations that were just named. Geographically, it's very different here's, but there's also a feeling of a shared here once we start practicing together. And I think that's just completely amazing. All these different here's can start merging into a feeling of a shared origin or a shared here. Yeah, and for me, so that the practice of just what happens when we sit still, what can happen when we sit still. For me, that was in my biography and life, it was the first time I sat on the cushion was the first time I actually felt like home. I felt like I was beginning to arrive in my life. It was when that happens, then that can become, and for me it has become, the beginning of something that I didn't ever want to end. It was very clear to me, I'm just always going to do this from now on, keep arriving in my life and in this very location that we can call here. So yeah, Tova asked me the same questions, like why did you start to practice? How did you start to practice? And for me, the beginning, I think as for many people, there are different kinds of beginnings of practice, of course, and they feel individually very much like coming out of the particular circumstances of our lives. But I think for so many of us, the beginning of practice is either suffering, some form of suffering, or dukkha in Pali Sanskrit, or it can be an intimation, a kind of longing. Those two is what I've come to encounter as. And for me, it was both. It was suffering and it was an intimation. Life didn't really have to be the way that I was experiencing it at the time. I don't know if you, I always like to bring in fun facts. Here's one fun fact, which is that the etymology, those of you who've been listening to my talks in recent years almost, I point that out a lot, but the etymology of the word dukkha, which then we often translate as suffering, and I've kind of stopped doing that because I think neither the English nor the German word for no matter what we do with it, be it suffering or unsatisfactoriness or stress or whatever, none of that for me really captures what the dynamic is essentially about. And the word dukkha in Sanskrit, etymologically, just means like, ka is a wheel, and a wheel, of course, has a center, right? So it's like where the axis goes. There's the center of the wheel. And du means when the axis is off, when it's not in the center. And so the Buddhist kind of like counterpoint to dukkha is sukha. And we could translate that as bliss or joy that arises just from the experience of aliveness, sukha. And sukha means when the axis is back in the center. So there's that little difference. You have your wheel, and it's like either off center, and then it's dukkha. And that's, to me, as was read before I did this training called body-mind centering. And just experientially, without any analysis of it or explanation, the name itself became a program for me, just the name itself, centering body and mind. In what? I have no idea, but I did know it was off-center. Something fundamental about my existence was off-center. And so to center that, I had no idea, actually, when I enrolled in the program. I hadn't even looked at what they do. I was just interested in the name. It's like, oh, it centers. That's very good, because that's the problem. It's that feeling of it's just off. Something is off. So yeah, I think to me that etymology of that very word, which of course is also with the Four Noble Truths, the beginning of Buddhism, the recognition of what happens when there's a feeling of how we're functioning, our bodies and mind being off-center, being in dukkha. And the whole path is that little piece here, that little piece. That's the whole path. And it's like the difference, literally, between heaven and hell. It's like the axis is in the center, bliss. And it's off-center. And it's, whoa, everything feels wrong. It doesn't quite come together. I had that experience when I started to practice very, very strongly. For me, what happened, I'll tell you that part super briefly, but just so you can get a feel, and you'll have your individual versions of, I would think, unless you don't, and then that's great, but you'll have your individual versions of dukkha. Mine was, I realized, it was a specific moment when I realized that all my thoughts, everything that was happening in me, in my inner space, they felt like they were coming from the outside. Now I know for those of you with psychological backgrounds, that sounds alarming, but they came from the inside, but it wasn't, I could tell I didn't make them. I felt like, oh, I'm at the receiving end. I didn't decide I was going to think this thought. It was more like the thought happened, and it was ruminating thoughts. It was like recurring thoughts. It was fearful thoughts. In my case, it was thoughts that all revolved around external questions in some way. Like, am I really okay? Do people like me? What if they don't like me? It was all like that whole dynamic was the origin of all these thoughts I was experiencing. And I felt I didn't decide to have these thoughts. I didn't exactly make them. I didn't intend them. I didn't want them. They made me suffer. And yet I was fully occupied by these thoughts. So I noticed in a particular moment, I remember exactly, I was walking on a tiny little pathway near my parents' house. And I suddenly realized that all my thoughts were like, the best word I had for it, it felt as if they were coming from a third-person perspective, as if I was relating to myself from a third-person perspective. I was relating to myself almost like from the outside. I realized how I couldn't inhabit my own experience. We had just learned at school, I was like 17 or 16 at that time, and we had just learned in grammar that distinction between first-person perspective. I think such and such. I want such and such. And the second person perspective, the you, and then the third person perspective, the she, it's about somebody. And I was noticing, even my thoughts, that sounds a little weird, but it was that, right? I noticed that when I thought about myself, I even applied the third person perspective. My thought, literally, if I had written it out, it was, I think she is hungry now. It's like, oh, why am I not just hungry? Why do I think she is hungry? So I noticed it was kind of subtle. I wasn't really thinking these thoughts out in verbal forms, but I noticed that that presence was there, as if I wasn't fully inhabiting my experience. And when I realized that I didn't know how to change that, is when I knew I had to do something. I knew I have to learn how to change this situation. So yeah, and then there's a whole long story that follows, which I don't think we're going to go into today, which then in the end, though, my decision, I want to do something about this, led me eventually. I considered doing psychotherapy and so forth. But in kind of circumstantial ways, I ended up finding the Zen Buddhist Center in the Black Forest, which, by the way, if you can see our residents there at Johanneshof are also online. Nice to see you guys. I miss you. Yeah, so I ended up at Johanneshof and then landed on a cushion on this 1 square meter. And as I said, I could feel and see, oh my goodness, this is a way that I arrived in how I couldn't feel myself. But that was a feeling. That was my first notion at that time. Oh, I can't really feel myself, but that is a feeling. And that felt like for me, it felt like the first real feeling I ever had, to feel how I couldn't feel myself. Now I would say that was feeling how the axis was off center. I could feel the offness. I wasn't any longer at that moment just kind of caught in the offness. I could feel the offness. I could feel how I couldn't feel myself. And I was extremely profoundly both grateful and happy to feel that. It wasn't a good feeling, but it was a real feeling. And so, for me, arriving in Zen practice was a way of what it felt like. I didn't care. And again, I was quite young, actually. I was like 18 by the time I had landed on the cushion. And it did feel a little bit like an alien in a different kind of world. But it was like arriving in reality, or like arriving in my life. And so, yeah, I did decide very early on that I didn't care. I didn't know if I would always sit zazen, or if I would do this thing they called Zen practice again. That wasn't important to me. And it's still it wasn't important to me that it was Zen at that time. It could have been anything else. I didn't care. It was just the process that started being possible. And I thought it was weird. They were doing all these different forms and they were wearing these robes and so forth. It wasn't important to me that it was Zen. I didn't choose Zen exactly. And then for a while, as I continued to practice, the forms and the robes and everything became very, very, very important to me. For like 20 years or so, very important. And now I'd say they're not so important again. Now it's more just how everything we do can be woven and should be woven into a particular kind of dynamic and into a particular kind of process that ideally can allow us and support us and lead us into inhabiting our own experience fully. To me, it's actually as simple as that. What happens when we start inhabiting our experience fully, bodily fully? I'd say now, if I thought today, of course, when we meet and speak, then for me, I always think about what's like, I wait for sentences to arise. What's today's sentence that feels alive and right? And when I waited for that today's sentence, that the sentence became that what I'm so profoundly interested in and hope to share as part of practicing together is how bodily inhabited stillness. And with stillness here, I don't mean just the absence of noise or some feeling, not even just some feeling, but I mean something like when bodily inhabited stillness, stillness almost like it's my first address, it's the primary experience, stillness, actually just stillness. It's what I mean with stillness right now is something that can be present in existence just in the same way that aliveness is present in existence. Some underlying connectivity that can be experienced though as stillness. So bodily inhabited stillness, it's like stop time or something, or an op when there's nothing outside of it. So bodily inhabited stillness, how that experience can unstructure the mind. And I think that's like, to me, that notion is, I studied psychology, as was just read, but that notion, how to unstructure the mind and that the mind can be unstructured through fully inhabiting stillness. That to me was the big news that Zen practice brought into my life. Oh my God, oh my Buddha, the mind can be unstructured. And if it can be unstructured, it can be restructured. That was, we spend, whether we like it or not, we can't help it. We're born into life as babies. And then again, whether we like it or not, our mind is being structured. We learn our ABCs, we learn our multiplication tables, we learn the grammar of our language. That's a big, big, big structuring of mind, the grammar of our language. We have a Japanese person sitting here who's nodding knowingly. Japanese grammar, I studied enough. I studied 3 months of Japanese, which was just enough to know there is no way I'm ever going to speak this language. But also just enough to know that how different the grammar of the language structures the world. So the way our mind is structured is how our mind then structures the world. It's just that we then start looking from how our mind is structured. So we can't see it anymore. We just think it's the world that's structured in that way. But no, it's our mind that's structured in that way. So yeah, from baby on, our mind is being structured in all these different ways. It's like, in America, I've just recently started I'm having a very steep learning curve happening here in how America functions these days, what's going on here. It's very different from Europe, actually. And one sensitivity I'm developing more is how, with America being so much an immigrant culture, what it means when so many different cultural backgrounds are overlapping. And everyone is living next to each other with so many different cultural backgrounds. Like, it's almost a little bit what I'm beginning to be more sensitive to is how in this kind of culture, it's like there's so many different cultures all interacting and overlapping in the same kind of societal conversation. That's amazing. And I can see how it would be challenging. So in Europe, of course, that is happening too, and it should happen. From my point of view, it should happen much more. But it's like America is being an immigrant country with with Native Americans. And anyways, it's just, I'm beginning to be sensitive is all I'm trying to say to what's going on here. And so we grow into our certain family systems that have their own views, right? So those are being internalized. And babies, I just talked to somebody yesterday, we both agreed how babies are these incredible little tuning forks, right? They're in their unstructured experience. It's not yet structured. Everything is happening all at once. And they're totally located in that experience. If I look at a baby, I can see that baby isn't planning tomorrow. It's not doing that. It's not worrying about yesterday. The baby is just totally immersed. Whoa, a sound. And it doesn't even call it a sound. It's just like, it's so located in its immediate experience. And then it's like a tuning fork. I have this little nephew now, and he can see how he orients. He needs to feel that resonance, like with his eyes. He seeks his mother and father primarily, and they are tuning how that tuning happens. And that, I'm sure, structures their minds. That's how we got structured. For the better, for the worse, who knows? It's just how we got structured. And the good news is we can always unstructure that. It's like in psychotherapy, and I have that from a postcard at a psychotherapist's bathroom wall, where it says, "It's never too late to have a good childhood." We can unstructure our mind and re-inhabit where we came from. We don't need to look, we can look at the present. And I think that's a cultural worldview, how a culture has come, for whatever reason, to look at the present. The present can be defined by the past. That's oftentimes the worst choice. The present can be defined by the past. The present can be defined exclusively by the present itself. I think that is what we end up calling suchness in Buddhism, when the present is exclusively defined by the present itself. Yes, how the present has become is present in the present, but it's present in the present. It's not present outside of the present. As a definition of the present, it's present in the present, how something has become, how I am right now. This Nicole can be alively. I can be my becoming. I don't have to be the enactment, the unconscious automatic, is the worst choice again, the unconscious automatic enactment of my past. I can be the alive enactment of the present. But I think one of the ways that I think should, my point of view, enter our wisdom conversations a lot more is how the present can be defined by the future. It's not just who am I, what am I? It's also who and what do I hope I will have become through how I live this moment now. We can shape, we can participate in the present much more with much more compassion for the future, with much more compassion of knowing that it is us now that are shaping the world that our children, whether they are our own biological children or the children of our kind, it is us now who are shaping the world that our children are going to have to live in. So we could look at the present with the compassion of that perspective. And I think, to start being flexible about time is an extremely important part of Zen practice. And it's one of the ways that we can kind of unhinge ourselves from pretty fundamental worldviews. You can also just, something that comes to mind right now, there's, those views on time. So what I just said is kind of like almost from a meta perspective, or I can look at the present from the perspective of the present or the future or the past. Experientially, that could be phrased differently. You can, as Baker Roshi has oftentimes pointed out, and for me, that was one of the big experiences that showed me how views shape perception. That's such a, the Buddhist path begins with right views. And I think the main reason for that is because views precede perceptions. We tend to think, and that's such a big mistake, we tend to think, oh, I view things this way because this is how I perceive them. No, it's the other way around. I perceive them that way because that's how I view them. That change, just that shift in view, it's a view, one way or the other. That shift in view opens so many doors to freedom. So if we hold that, so that was one of the first and maybe first year of practice, Baker Roshi kept emphasizing that for a long time. Views precede perceptions. And we wouldn't usually know that because we can't see our views. Our views are what we're looking from. So we tend to think, oh, here's my perception, and therefore I have such and such an opinion. But prior to the perception was a view. And the most fundamental views, there are, of course, psychological views, biographical views that we're holding, and that can literally warp. Is warp an English word? Can warp our perception. But we can't see it, right? I mean, it's like they are what we're looking from, but we can have biographical views, like I said before. One of my views that I identified and that experience in walking away from my parents' house, which is an interesting metaphor all in itself, walking away from my parents' house, and then starting to see a view that I had grown up into. And that view was, the question was a question view. Or actually, no. The question was, am I okay? Do people like me? But really the underlying view was, I'm not okay. And so therefore there was a question. And that question warped my perceptions. I couldn't care about trees and flowers or sky or clouds because they didn't answer that question. So if the view I look from into the world warps what I even notice, and again, for me, getting a real view of that view was an incredibly important experience in practice. So they can be biographical views, like I just said, personally obtained questions, doubts, fears. But they can be cultural views, like I just said about time. And those cultural views about space and time are a lot more shape our experience in much more fundamental ways. So one thing Baker Roshi kept saying about how views precede perceptions, one thing he said is, in Asian culture, they don't think I am going into the future. I think in Western cultures, we think we're going into the future. Is that right? I mean, do you feel like how can actually bodily experience that? As I'm The future is there. The past is behind me. We even say that, and I think in English and in German. Oh, that's behind me. The past is behind me spatially. The future is in front of me. And we may think that that's how it is, but it's not how it is. It's a view. It's a perspective on how it can be this way. But Chinese culture, for instance, tends to think the future is coming towards me. I'm here. So what has just changed now is the dynamic of movement. I'm here. I'm still. Bodily inhabited stillness. And the future is coming towards me. I'm receiving the future. I'm not going into it. I'm receiving it. Once, and again, I love trying these things out bodily. So these things are meaningful in how they can shape our feeling, our a kind of bodily feeling of what's going on. If I receive the future, I must notice. I can't help but notice that it's unpredictable. Because I'm not receiving predictability. If I'm receiving the next moment, I'm a lot more likely to notice how I don't actually know really what's going to happen. So I can start receiving the future in its unpredictability. Again, a fun fact, there's an Aborigine culture south of Australia. I think I forget actually. I think it's a culture in New Zealand, but don't quote me on that. I'm not sure right now. But there is a culture that I do know that has yet a whole different view of time. That was in a book where, and it just cracked me up, an anthropologist kept saying to them, views on time, and it was just naturally speaking from how, of course, the future is in front of us. That's what we're going into. And the elders of that culture said, why would you think that? It makes no sense. I know what just happened. I know, we just had this conversation. We just came in from that other building into this building. I can see the past. The past is in front of me. The future, I can't see. The future is behind me. So you've just kind of turned the man on the timeline. And yet there we have a whole different experience, just a whole different view of how time, the present moment, can be inhabited. There are all these choices. Now, what has just happened is, whoa, if the future is behind me and it's unpredictable, I can't see it, then how does that make me relate to what's going on right now? Well, if I inhabit that, I would want to be a lot more alert if it's behind me. It's a little bit like when you're in a dark room that I don't know, when I'm in a dark room that I don't know, and I can't see anything, then my whole body starts being the sensitive little antenna. And it starts, without having my eyes, starts trying to feel things out. So that view can shift us actually into a world of feeling. Yeah, okay. So I didn't mean to say all that, but I did. It was unpredictable. So anyways, what I did mean to say is that how important that was to me is what I meant to say, how views precede perceptions. And perceptions then end up constituting what we call the world, or what we call here. So to learn, first of all, that we have a choice about the views we hold. But in order to have a choice, we have to identify what are the views that I'm already holding. And that's not such an easy process. How do I identify something that I'm looking from, something that to me is invisible? So, and here again is where, as I said, the sentence that came to me this morning is a sentence bodily, how bodily inhabited stillness can unstructure the mind. So what I'm saying here is, as a craft, is bodily inhabiting stillness, that's zazen, that's learned through zazen. How that can create an observing aspect of mind that can see into mind. So now there's the mind that perceives, and now we have an observing aspect of mind that can see into how mind perceives. It can see seeing. So that skill can be learned in Zazen, and it's, I think, the core skill to be learned in Zazen. And then there's the whole process of how to keep that observing aspect of mind a place of bodily inhabited stillness, a place that's not also filled with unconscious views. Like if that observer now has his own agenda or their own agenda, we have a problem. then we're just playing mind against mind. So the sensitivity of the yogi, I think, is how to keep that observing aspect of mind still and free and empty, so that it can actually see into the structures of mind from which we're seeing the world. Yeah, and so how bodily inhabited stillness that can become, as I always say, I think the process where practice is gradual. We always have this, some moments are sudden in practice, they are sudden insights, and then they make a difference. But the overall process of practice is gradual, because it's a neurological process. We need to learn how to inhabit these new perspectives. And so this new perspective from the place of bodily inhabited stillness can start unstructuring the mind. But that can be, then we're in a process where practice, from my point of view, has a tremendously therapeutical aspect to it. Of course, we're not holding our views neutrally, or, oh yeah, sure, I can change my view, no problem. No, they have their reasons. We're deeply either identified, we have very good biographical reasons for our views. So now we're in a process where that we need to shift our primary address, our home address. So the still empty observing aspect of mind needs to become our home address from which we can kind of release. I do think it's a process of releasing the views that are questioning, and maybe some of them we want to keep, but we want to keep the ones that we want to keep intentionally from a first person perspective. This is a view that I actually choose. It's a vow. It's a intentionally inhabited view. It's part of who I really most deeply wish to be. It's not one of my reactive patterns. So then there's a process, that whole process of releasing. Yeah, and then ideally, I have so far only told you the first part of the sentence that came up for me this morning. How bodily inhabited stillness can unstructure the mind, a process of releasing, of allowing, of acknowledging. But then the second part, how that place can become the place from which our potential unfolds. And I think what I mean here with potential is not our individual personal potential, but more like what we could be in the most fundamental sense. Yeah, as the person we are, that's one level of identity. I am Nicole. I have certain potentials and others I don't have. But that's my smallest identity. Nicole is the smallest identity. I could hold other identities, like gender or ethnicity or something. a little larger identity is the identity as a human being. In that sense, all of us sitting here, we're all the same in our identity as a human being. But I think the most profound sense of identity is as a sentient being in the midst of heaven and earth, a sentient being on this sentient planet. So how to release the mind, the patterns of the mind, into this fundamental identity where what we're first of all is a nameless presence, just a presence that resonates, even digitally resonates. This nameless, formless presence that's primarily, first of all, there's just aliveness, like my little nephew. First of all, there's just aliveness and sentience and resonance. And then how to choose the next moment and how to participate in the next moment from that place. I think that is, to me, very much, that is what my practice has become. The unstructuring of mind, then the meeting and speaking. One last fun fact, then I'll stop. The word communication, meeting and speaking, the word communication means to change together. So how to unstructure the mind such that meeting, kind of unconditional meeting, and speaking as in changing together, how from that place our hopefully good wishes and good intentions can be born and can be carried into the next moment. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say today. Thank you very much for listening and your patience. And what shall we do now? Who's in charge?
What we do is, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound like you're underwater, but I can hear you.
Ah, wonder what that is. Typically, what we do is John Hinman handles the online cohort, and I handle the in-house cohort in terms of recognizing questions to be asked. But with the number of people we have here tonight, today, I recommend maybe a slightly different approach. So I think what we do is we take turns. So let's take turns a little bit. We'll have one from here and then one from online, just to respond to what you have said. Maybe ask you a question to elaborate a little more on something.
Sure.
So someone in house? Anyone? Anybody willing to be the first firing line? Please give your name and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Kyle. Thank you for the talk. That
Hi.
was very relatable for my experience sitting this morning. I kept noticing thoughts returning to trying to trace back some of those root views from early childhood while sitting. When I noticed my mind doing that, I tried to just return to the breath and let those thoughts go. You were talking about investigating those views. Is that best done off of the?
Oh, wait, excuse me, sorry. Something just happened to our sound system. I lost you when you started saying, is that best done on the cushion? So just give me a moment here to let our
It's on our end, so we got.
Can we hear him again?
We're good.
Yeah, so investigating those views.
Apparently our loudspeaker turns itself off.
Can you hear me now?
I can't, sorry. It's on our end, I can't hear you right now.
I'm coming closer to the speaker, is that better?
No, it's just like everything is mute here. I can see you. Okay, so can you try again?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you again. Yes.
Okay, great. So investigating those views, is that best done off of the cushion? The cushion is for embodying that stillness, and then kind of after that, then you trace back those root views.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's also the question, the way I read it, how much doing is good to do in Zazen. And I think that's a school type question. I don't know Taiun Sama Sensei Roshi, how you handle that question in your Sangha. I think there can be different perspectives on it. For me, one thing I would say generally is that it's good to not have much doing in Zazen, but to have allowing and appearing. So like one thing that the way I would approach that is, yes, primarily I would say Zazen is the craft and the best possible activity to learn how to inhabit stillness bodily. But then it's like, while that is the activity, things start revealing themselves. They start showing themselves. And there's and that I do know that there are different possibilities of how the didactics can work. Like what happens when something reveals itself, when a thought comes forth. There are schools that say, well, don't think. I tend to say, watch it, but don't invite it to tea. That's, of course, the Suzuki Roshi thing. You don't want to entertain it. You don't want to go into it, but you just let it happen and see what reveals itself, how it reveals itself. That would be my view on that.
Perhaps to answer your question from this
Oh,
perspective.
sorry. We just, something is happening here with our sound system. He's talking to me and I can't hear him.
I think maybe it's learned my voice and it shuts off when I start talking.
Yeah, I get that. Now I can hear you. That was funny.
Artificial intelligence. Yeah, here I think we follow Dogen in non-thinking, going from thinking or not thinking to non-thinking.
Yeah,
That's not exactly what we're doing. Thinking may occur, but that's not what we're doing.
I hear you.
And then going from non-thinking to non-doing.
Yeah,
It's obvious that we can practice the technique or the method, just as you can practice a method of playing a piano in
yeah,
music. But you cannot teach or practice music. You have to find the music.
yeah,
You have to find the Zen. So I think we would emphasize the same thing you're emphasizing:
yeah,
non-thinking as a middle way, and non-doing. Even when we leave the cushion,
yeah,
we're
yeah,
immersed in doing, and we're doing zazen. But doing zazen is non-doing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I love these conversations. I think that's very interesting. And that's exactly how I would say it too. Yeah. Thank you.
Cosmic catch-22.
Yeah. Yeah, I read that book. That's one of the problems. It's like Catch-22. I don't know, for the Germans, maybe who wouldn't be familiar with that. The way I understand it, it's like no matter what you do, it's wrong. Something like that.
Okay, John, it's your turn.
Thank you, Hojo. For those of you online, and again, today we've got a much larger group than normal. In an effort to try to keep it simple and manageable, maybe you could put something in the chat, either a digital hand or something to indicate that you would like to comment or ask a question, or you're welcome to even put the question in the chat, and I'll try to take those as they come in, as much as I can, in the order they come in. Does someone and again, I can't see all of you. That's why I'm suggesting this. Does someone have a question or a comment?
I can see Janet there.
Okay, thank you, Janet.
Hello, am I hearable?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes.
I was very interested in what you said about having when you first started to be interested in practice, about having the feeling of being separate from your own experience somehow.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I came to it exactly the opposite way, in a sense. I had
Mhm.
the sense of being overwhelmed and captured by
Yeah.
my experience.
Yeah.
And what helped me when I first started reading about Zen and other things too, what was helpful was to find a way to at first just to shift my perspective
Yeah.
and experience some of those difficult things in a different way, from a different angle. And then when I started sitting, I had more and more the experience of being a kind of container,
Mm.
and all the everything was playing out within that container, but around it was a sense of of peace, of well-being that contained those things, even though
Mm.
they were still there and they were the same as they had been before, but there was a sense that I wasn't caught by them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's interesting that it
Yeah.
goes either way. And I have
Yes.
kind of a similar experience sometimes when I'm sitting and my zazen feels very messy, and it's
Mhm.
not quite the way I want it to. It feels like
Mhm.
it's not the way it should be, or it's not quite right. And sometimes it helps to sort of separate myself from what's going on a little bit, and then I'm this peaceful container surrounding this, containing all this. Sometimes that doesn't work, and it seems to work better to just join with that messiness
Mhm.
and not try to change it. I remember, I
It's
guess one
I
example is feeling
Yeah.
that I'm not sitting upright. There's feeling constantly like there's something wrong with my posture.
Mm.
It's almost like I'm this piece of crumpled up paper, and at one point I would just think, I'm just going to sit here as a crumpled piece of paper. I'm just going to be crumpled.
Yeah. I love the crying Buddha, by the way. You know, there's this
Crying
figure.
Buddha?
Yeah, somebody gave it to me once. There, it's actually not. I think it's not really a Buddha, but it's a crying monk, and it's a little. It's actually very common. It's a figure that just shows a monk sitting in zazen but crying, and
I don't think I've
sometimes
seen that.
that's us. You know, sometimes like, oh,
Yeah. Wow.
yeah. Thank you, Janet.
But anyway, thank you.
Yeah. And it is interesting. I mean, it's like all these different, but you know, the good news is, especially when we sit sesshin, we have so much time on the cushion. We can try out all these different things.
Yeah.
Okay, we have one here. Joe has a
Yeah,
comment or
please.
question.
Yeah.
Speak up loudly, Joe. Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, good. So, one point in your talk, I'm sorry if I don't get this quite right, but you were talking about the value of being in the now and being alert, present for what is. And you
Mm.
brought up, it was in the context of time, and you
Yeah.
brought up some really interesting different perspectives. And the last one you brought up was that culture that future is coming from behind,
Mm-hmm.
segueing into a metaphor about being in a dark room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what I discovered in myself as you were describing being in that dark room and the future coming behind, it actually felt rather frightening.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sort of reminded of in trauma psychology, there's something called hypervigilance, which is when you're in a fear-based situation, all your focus will just tunnel in on just like one thing,
Yeah.
which feels like the opposite. It's alert in one way, but it's sort of dropping away everything except for what the threat is, which
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah.
is the intention behind that metaphor. So I was kind of wondering if you could
Yeah.
offer a different metaphor
Thank you. Yeah.
to avoid that whole hypervigilance situation, which is not what I
Completely.
think.
Yes, I hear you. That's a good point. Yes. So, yeah. I mean, you know, existing is actually kind of frightening. Fundamentally, existing is actually kind of frightening, but frightening to what? I would say to the permanent sense of self, to our identity, it's frightening. So I wouldn't, this is again my thing here, and I'd be very interested to hear what Taiwan would say to that also. My thing would be the craft of Zen practice, the way I understand it, is not to try to alleviate the way existence is, which is kind of like fundamentally, we don't actually know what's going on. This is a kind of like, it's a mystery. It's a complex mystery. We're inhabiting it. And, you know, time is, everything is changing all the time. But what I would emphasize here is that the craft is, the trust is, it can, this complexly interwoven existence, which we fundamentally don't understand. It's kind of dark. So in that sense, the dark room metaphor is not just a metaphor. It is, we are actually living in a kind, in the darkness of not really knowing, not really understanding what's going on. So it's not to say, so what consciousness creates is the illusion of control, I would say. So I think the skill in Zen would be how to, and would not be to say, you know, it's really not that bad. The skill in Zen would be to learn how to inhabit the facts of existence without fear. I think the fear is actually, or how it can be disorienting and frightening, is actually something we can release into, we can grow into even. Because it's the good news, I would say, is it's really only frightening to the permanent, wanting to be permanent sense of self. It's not so much frightening to aliveness, to your identity, as I said towards the end of the talk, if one learns how to fully identify just with aliveness. It's just this, I am no longer me, but aliveness is lived. And to that layer of what I can be, what I am, it's not frightening, actually. It's kind of thrilling, exciting, wonderful, kind of awe that comes. So I think it's to shift what we are. That would be my take. Tayun, anything you want to add?
Anything more on that, Joe?
I would just add, as you were borrowing from another part of your talk, that maybe that my fright was colored by my views and my art.
That's
And
always, yes.
With more restructuring or unstructuring of those views, be able to walk into that darkening with aliveness rather than fear.
Your comment reminds of a comment, Taoism, a phrase from Taoism. It says something like, caught by desire, we see only the manifestations. Freed from desire, we confront the mystery. So the mystery is what you're speaking of. But, you know, how, if you think about it, how could there be anything fundamentally wrong with reality other than human beings' ideas about it?
That's exactly it. Yeah, there's nothing wrong. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So nothing to be frightened of.
Nothing.
Except our own ignorance.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. How are we doing with time here? Oh, yeah, we have a few minutes.
Frank Morales got his hand up, looks like.
Yeah, Frank, yeah.
Hi, Roshi.
Hello,
can you hear
hi.
me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Wonderful. I'm so glad you brought up the issue around fear. My experience for 50 years teaching people meditation as a psychotherapist, many times they come in and they got a lot of anxiety. And most people have anxiety. And then if you don't prepare them for that initial thing, what you just said, they don't come back. They don't want to show up again. They
I've
get
noticed
scared, they
that.
run away.
Yeah.
Right? Because one of the French existentialists said, awareness is despairness. Jean-Paul Sartre said that, right?
Yeah.
As an existentialist. And I think this is the experience, the human experience for most of us is we walk around anxious all the time, don't know who in the hell we are, who we're supposed to be, all those existential questions. And then all of a sudden, somebody says, well, sit down, just be with it. Oh, yeah. Racing mind. Oh, no, I didn't want to do this. I'm going to smoke pot instead. I at least get mellow doing that or have a couple of beers. And so the experience for most people is that at first they're all, so I try to prepare them for all these things. Be patient. All that will shake down. And it's like when you drop that pebble in a pool of dark water, you let it settle for a while. But if you're not prepared for that experience, it's not helping somebody. So I'm so glad you just brought that up because that has to be the first thing you face. And if you don't face that, that is going to be very difficult for most people. That's why they don't have an enjoyable experience of Zazen. From my experience, they're all like, what? Their neurosis hits them right in the face. And they're like, whoa, what am I doing this for? Let me get out of here. So I'm so glad you brought that up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So that point you just brought up, that's totally up my alley. I love how I can apply English idioms now. But that is because I think that, and that's also, you know, once a person practices in the field of meeting and speaking, like with Sangha, there's a framework and there's a containment that can support that process of, you know, kind of containing and supporting the person for that kind of what you're bringing up, those fearful moments. But I think in Western Buddhism, one of the things we're experiencing a lot is people learn meditation through an app or something, like all by themselves in some tiny little room. So I do think that one thing that's become really important to me is to take a much closer look at what, like in Tibetan Buddhism, they would call preliminary practices. I don't think they are preliminary for what at all. They just are the practice. But it's, from my point of view too, especially, like I think Sangha and being in a context where one actually physically meets and speaks, a lot of that is taken care of. But especially with like online, it's, from my point of view, very important to, like you're saying, to prepare the person in a certain way to create the circumstances where the person can already experience themselves as somebody who can open into unknowingness and into like uncertainty and so forth, because otherwise uncertainty is not necessarily a good thing. It's like from perspective of the wanting to be permanent self, uncertainty and unpredictability is not good news. It's like, sorry, one last thing and then I'll stop here. But one of my favorite quotes in Buddhism is Chogyam Trungpa, who said, you know, enlightenment is like when you're on an airplane, and it's like when you're falling out of an airplane. Enlightenment is like when you're falling out of an airplane, he says. And the good news, the bad news is you don't have a parachute. But the good news is there is no ground. All right, that's thank you.
I had to follow up on Frank's comment, just a brief
Yeah.
one. I think psychology in general, science in general, and even religion on the other end seem to have a little bit of a paranoid view of our original nature. And you got Jekyll and Hyde, you got, you know, all these kind of Frankenstein monster stories. And psychology, I think, is a little bit anxious about meditation. One book went on so far as to say something like, I think it was Epstein saying something like, unless you're umbilically connected to a therapist, you don't want to do meditation because you're going to run into things that you can't handle, kind of thing. So if you think about what is happening in Zazen, it's really intentional. personality disintegration. We're allowing that to happen. And that is a kind of a no-no in psychiatry. But we have great confidence in the original nature. So we don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
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 I am very, very sorry, but my teacher here, Baker Roshi, is going to need to take the seat because we have a talk, a follow-up talk right now. Is that okay, Atlanta Soto Zen Center? Can we
Wonderful.
come to a closure?
We're going to break for lunch.